My name is Lucy Williams. I'm a chartered legal executive and work for a company called Key Group Services Limited. We give employment law and HR advice, along with health and safety to, I think it's just over 300 SMEs. So we've got a very wide range of experience from that point of view.
As part of this, we've been speaking to lots of experts. And so with your legal standpoint, it'll be really good to know what you think on some of the trends that are impacting HRTA recruitment and the market more generally. So we'll kick off with day one rights. How will the change impact bigger corporates who already have processes in place versus SMEs who might not? So how do people prep for it?
So I think the larger companies, the corporates, I think they already will use a process. They'll have a policy on it. And so I don't think there'll be significant changes because they've got a HR person in house. They've got the people to be able to, and the infrastructure to be able to do that kind of thing. With the SMEs, they've got your managing director could also deal with accounts. He could he could have 10 hats, and performance, especially of new employees, is something that does go as a miss. It doesn't get done like it should, really. So I think, from our point of view, we've got to look at our clients and we need to help. We will be putting in the robust policies, and obviously provide training and help and support, because they've got to go from where most of the SMEs, if I'm honest, they don't give training, they don't give feedback, and it's not out of a willingness, they're just so busy or don't have the structure to do so, and they're going to have to do that now. They're going to have to put it all in place and follow to a T. What it involves yet, we don't know. But they have said it's going to be 9 months. But I think coming up to it, because it's saying it's not going to come in place obviously till August next year, I think there'll be a big rise in dismissals before then, definitely.
Forgive me if I'm incorrect. I think there was an update on it where they're actually going to consider contract workers as part of day one rights, if that's correct. So
and agency workers as well. That's something that's come through, and that will really have an impact. So especially, I think, for your restaurants, pubs, that structure, and also care homes, that kind of thing, who rely upon the 0-hour workers and casual workers. I do think they need the protection, because we see it, with a lot of smaller companies. We do see employees, they brought in on a casual workers basis, but they work regular hours. And that's something we will pick up on and advise our clients. But a lot of people are, and the workers themselves are being manipulated and not treated fairly from that point of view. So that's definitely something that does need, I think, to come in,
And how do you think that's going to impact the market generally? So lots of people, like you say, do rely on 0 hours contract for people who are potentially trying to plan a talent pipeline, or where they may have peaks and troughs in when they need extra resource. How do you think that will impact the market in terms of how people will have to manage that?
I think it'll stop the recruitment or limit the recruitment, because it takes away their ability to call in as and when. So I definitely think it would limit the recruitment side of things. But I think with the day one rights to unfair dismissal, I think that will limit recruitment as well. So I think it'll actually be harder in the longer run to be able to find a job, basically, especially for, I think, from my experience, is it could be where people want a bit of the part-time work, where you've got young mothers, or, need that flexibility. I think that will reduce significantly for them.
And do you think it's going to be an added expense then for companies are going to be planning a lot more forward with who they need to employ? Because obviously, if you've got people who have got day one rights, then that's going to impact what the cost is to the business. So do you think that people are going to be a bit more cautious?
Absolutely. We've had one client last week who needed to do an under 2-year dismissal. And his comments were, well, when the day one rights comes in, I'm just not going to recruit, because it was a real problem employee. And he's, again, one of these gentlemen who's got 10 hats, and he's like, I haven't got the infrastructure or the ability to do it. And he said, I just want to recruit and I'll try and do it internally instead. So it's, it's quite wide, I think, from that point of view.
Yes, it's a much bigger risk. I think what we're finding is people are already, you know, that you've got to try and find the right people to join the business, but it almost takes away that wiggle room to have an element of error there, and you need to be really certain then when you hire someone.
Yeah, definitely. Because at the moment you can just call them in, you haven't got to give a reason. You know, sometimes it is unfair, I got to be honest. It's not always fair. But sometimes there are employees who are not meeting the required standards of what's needed. And I think from that point of view, it's going to take away from the production and then put it to having to manage these employees, where before or now you could just say, right, okay, it's not working out, and you can just move on then in a way.
For the people who don't have those processes or infrastructure in place, what would you recommend to those businesses who need to prepare for it?
It would be getting a robust policy, ensure managers know how to manage that policy with their employees. Training for equality and diversity will be significant, because obviously if there's any performance issues that are related to a disability, or menopause is something that's coming more and more. You know, there could be performance issues linked to something like that, and you've got sex discrimination. So it's really important that equality diversity training is up to date as well. So I think it's those points really.
No, that makes complete sense. I suppose on the last point that you made, it sort of like takes us nicely into our next topic with sort of D&I and neurodiversity, and how have you noticed with particularly with sort of policies around protecting those groups, have you noticed that there's a big increase in people who are sort of prioritizing those things?
There's not, if I'm honest, no.
Wow.
We obviously preparing for this today, I was going, you know, and if anything, with the SMEs, they're not prepared for it. We go into clients, you know, when we do the meetings for them, and we have had an influx of neurodivergent employees, and the SMEs don't know how to manage them. They get scared, if I'm honest, at times, and there's a real disconnect in how it can be managed. So I think, well, the larger companies are definitely looking at it.
Yeah.
From the SME's point of view, it's not something that they are moving forward with.
Wow. So do you think that's the whole thing as well? Do you think that's all the way from how they recruit to how they onboard, manage? Is it the whole process? It's not really a consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a consideration at all. And that's, obviously we're talking about the AI slightly as well, where it moves into, and that's what I find with the SMEs as well. All that side of it is just not thought of really. Yeah. It's a totally, to what I've read today with the information you're giving me, it couldn't be further apart.
Wow.
From where the SMEs are compared to the large corporations.
And do you think that gap will get bigger, or do you think they will then, because it's a necessity, sort of eventually it'll need to be acknowledged maybe, or do you think that gap will get bigger?
Unless there's real robust law brought in, I think it'll continue to get bigger. So you would have seen the Me Too movements and whatnot. So the new legislation recently come in to do with sexual harassment. So I don't know if you're aware of that. And yeah, so as advisors, so we send out legislation on them. We read our policies, we provide training. And we've sent all information out, and I'd probably say only about 50% of our clients have responded to us. Okay. Even less with it, you know, we're giving the advice and saying what they need to do. So unless something like that happens, where they really, and it's brought forward from the government and the law changes, I don't think that it would only be if it's forced that it will happen.
You've got your background in the sort of legality of it, you work with lots of different clients who will have different scenarios, different workforces, and you have your own experience of neurodiverse traits and how you feel like you can work in an environment, or what you might need so that you can be your best self at work. How do you think all of that ties in together? So how do you think that are companies taking that into account, and do you think they will?
I try to help them do it, if I'm honest. You know, when you are going in, I see it's the same with neurodiversity and mental health. I think they're both tied to each other. Because I think if your mental health deteriorates, the
neurodiverse traits
they get a lot worse. They increase significantly, and it's the effect really is due to communication of their employers not speaking to them to understand how things are. And where we've gone in, we have had positive effects because we've kind of sat, and it does help because when they're sitting there talking to me, I can relate so well. And then I can speak to the employer then and say, well, look, this is how you can help. So, for instance, we've had one employee started wearing earphones because the environment around her was so loud. And we can help with those kind of things. But I do think they're just a long way. The small companies are a long way from really understanding the implications and how it is in the workplace, and how even though they've got different traits, that they can use them, and they are very good traits to have.
Absolutely. And do you think, from what you've seen with your clients, when they aren't acknowledging the difference in neurodiverse requirements in the workplace and how they can potentially support those employees, do you think that increases churn of employees? Do you think they tend to leave quicker?
There is more issues of them being likely to leave, but obviously with us we try and support, and we have got some really positive stories where we have gone in and helped, and with one client it was just a case of they needed to speak to each other.
Yeah.
And we were able to facilitate that. And since then, after she explained how she needed to work, the performance issues dropped. The mental health issues that come with it were a lot better. And now there's no problem at all. So
perfect.
It's definitely great. Yeah. What you have got is a lot of individuals who are neurodiverse will have a disability under the Equality Act. And from that point of view, if feasible adjustments aren't carried out, and if they're not, I suppose, helped, they're not properly performance managed, maybe consider occupational health. You could have claims for unfair dismissal, you could have disability discrimination. So it is really important, I think, to support.
And you mentioned sort of AI and the use of AI, how sometimes that might not necessarily benefit people with neurodiverse traits. From your experience working with sort of employers and neurodiverse employees and candidates, and actually from your own experience, how do you think that they might go through a neurotypical assessment process, or do you think that would be slightly different? Because if AI obviously comes into play, likelihood is it will probably favour a neurotypical type of response or person. So with your experience, how do you think that the approaches might differ?
I do think, if I'm honest, I think it's unfair. I really do. I think because the questions are difficult, we've got to do it sometimes in work, and I think the first time I done it, I felt totally overwhelmed with it. And because there's no direct answer, it's really difficult. And I think with the use of AI, you can miss so much from person. You can't see a personality. They may be really driven. And from those personality tests, we've done them on recruits ourselves, and they're not always right. So we've looked at them. We go over to a few different recruitment parts, and we've looked at them, and they've actually been correct. We've taken on the person despite the report, and it hasn't been accurate. And I think for individuals, who are, the neurodiversion, that could possibly be the reason why, because it's just so different. I think everybody's on the spectrum at some point. I really do.
And those tests are frustrating, especially the ones where you've got multiple choice, you have to choose an outcome, but some of them aren't quite right, or you might do a couple of them, and so picking one, just sometimes you wouldn't pick any of them.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
Touching on what you mentioned with reasonable adjustments and the legality behind it, how should employers and sort of TA leaders approach their processes to ensure that they are as inclusive as possible, making sure that it's best for a neurodiverse candidate as well as from the legal standpoint?
It's just making sure they're not discriminatory at all. So it is looking at your performance policies, making sure your equality and diversity, recruitment policies are all up to date. I think from reading one of the articles, I think it was McDonald's said they ask, tell us if you need reasonable adjustments. But you're not going to, if you're not going to come forward and say, I need a reasonable adjustment because I've got ADHD, or because there's that, while they say that they are fair and they will treat everybody the same, when people will look at it and go, well, or they've got ADHD or they've got autism and won't treat them fairly, I think, or that's how people would perceive it.
Absolutely. It's a case of whilst a reasonable adjustment might be super helpful, you don't want to make yourself stand out for the wrong reasons by asking for them. Yeah.
So I think the reasonable adjustments should be considered across the board in a way anyway. So have a look at your processes and just think, are they fair for everyone?
We know what the situation is now. Do you think that, given what you might have seen happen over the last 12 months with the increase in a lot more people are acknowledging neurodiversity in the workplace, a lot more people are focusing on their DE&I policies. Mm-hmm. Looking into your crystal ball, do you think there's going to be any major changes, or do you think there's going to be an even bigger increase over the next 12 months with everything else happening?
Yeah, but it's something we are doing. So we're doing a review at the moment of all our policies, and we will send out to our clients. And we will update the documents. So we will do that for them. But I think the gap there is they've got to put it into place. And that's a lot harder to help because they may not realise it's an issue that they've, or a lacking they've got because of the infrastructure and small size companies that they are. So I think it would only come into play when they get a neurodivergent employee, and that when it becomes an area that they need to address, that's the only time I think it will get addressed.
So food for thought, just because we've touched on a couple of bits that kind of tie together. We discussed around day one rights, and that will impact people's recruitment, and they may not recruit anymore, or they're going to be a lot more cautious. Do you think that day one rights and having to get your employment right if they do recruit, coupled with D&I and neurodiversity, do you think those two are going to have a little bit of a clash in the middle with people looking at it more closely and being a bit more nervous about neurodiverse candidates?
I think possibly. But I wouldn't say just neurodiverse. I think it would be across the board where you can get protection, in other ways as well, because obviously the neurodiversity will come under the disability, but there are other ones as well. So you've got obviously age, sex.
I think it will be across the board then.
I think it could be across the board, yeah, definitely.
When you go onto LinkedIn, you see sort of lots of announcements of redundancies sort of across the board. They're sort of like mass redundancies. And so you've got lots of candidates coming into the job market, people being more cautious about hiring, nervous about who they hire. So it's almost, again, it's this kind of this market stalemate. So from talking to your clients, do you think that maybe that nervousness will subside a little bit and people will be back open to recruiting, the market might improve?
I think that depends on obviously how they manage with the effect as well. So obviously they've got to see where, I suppose, the bottom line is, once you've got the day one rights, you've got, but there's other increases as well. So you've got your national insurance, and there's been multiple changes in the last few years that have had a financial impact on small businesses. So the implementation of pension, there's been an increase in way holidays have got to be paid, and there's been big jumps in national minimum wage as well, which rightly so, because obviously for the cost of living, but that does have all those parts have a significant impact. And when in the past they pull back from the recruitment, and they've got to see, and it ultimately then they put their prices up as well, don't they? So their costs do go up. So I'm expecting to see, obviously, especially with the national
insurance increase.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the national insurance increase. I'm sure that that is going to have a significant impact.
Yeah.
One of our clients who normally do an annual, pay increase, and they've had to say they pay review when they said they can't do it because of the implications of it coming up. So I think it will stop for a little while, but then I think as things settle and they see where they are financially, I think it will improve again because they become the new norm, doesn't it then?
Unfortunately, that new norm just constantly means the expenses are climbing for people. So we just have to sort of adjust each time, and it just gets a little bit harder each time to adjust.
Yeah, definitely. And with the SMEs, I do find that it is very difficult for them. And that's one side I think a lot of people don't see is when they are going up, they do contact us very worried, it's whether the businesses can sustain it. And I think that's something employees don't always see because they just, in a way, think there's a bottomless pot of cash. And they're just people, who are really struggling and concerned about how they will move forward.
It'd be really interesting from your point of view to hear about, because you work with lots of SMEs. So we have spoken to a couple of larger companies who have made a move back to more in-office working. And so they may be work remotely for 1 or 2 days. Have you noticed that with your clients, has there been any conversation around bringing employees back into the office, or are they sticking with flexible, or what are you noticing the trends to be?
I see most of them mind with the SMEs return to the office straight away.
Really?
Because definitely. Our office all did. And whilst there's an element of flexibility, if I can work from home tomorrow if I wanted, we are definitely more office based. And with the SMEs, it's definitely more, again, it's because you wear many hats. It's harder to do that when you're working from home. I've seen now where there's one client who were actually looking about putting a full process in place and reducing to a 4-day week as well.
Oh, wow.
Which is something I know. So that's something that they're looking at. From the SMEs, I think it's not so relevant. They returned back to normal life, I think, after COVID. And so it's not much of a
topic for them. Do you think that's industry based as well? Do you think that any particular industries obviously are more likely to go back into the office versus like people who might work in tech or SaaS?
Yes, I think definitely from that point of view, because we have got manufacturing and care homes and things like that. But even with the office workers, whilst I'd probably say about 50% of the office workers would work from home. But they're more, I'd say, the senior individuals rather than I suppose the administration staff, I'd say. It's
been a question that we've had come up quite a lot, and we've had it as a discussion point in a lot of the conversations is, one, do you think that it's more important for early careers workers to be back in the office to learn? And then 2, do you think that they are more or less likely to want to go into the office?
Well, we've been recruiting ourselves, and it's something that we have found because I agree. I think early learning or years of learning, and with us as a career, they do need to be in the office. Because with what we do, it can be so varied. You could 1 minute be working on a contract employment, the next minute you could be working on a disciplinary. It's so varied that we find they get isolated and would really struggle if they were working from home. But when we are recruiting, it's especially I think it is the younger individuals, they want to work from home and don't want to be in the office. It's definitely we are seeing a big difference from that point of view.
On that, do you think that's going to impact the market longer term? So do you think that when you have more senior people leave the job market, the people in the younger generation that are coming in, do you think they might lack certain skills that other generations had?
I think so, yes. And, I think a big thing for us is teamwork, because, we've got hard jobs. And I think it takes away the teamwork from it as well. And I think, where we have recruited, you could see that it does have an effect. Less wanting, I want to say, to be part of a team and help your colleagues, and part as well of you can't see if your team is struggling, if you're not working together, because whilst there's an element of you can obviously have Teams calls and you can email, it's very different to being in the same office together and being able to provide that support.
Yeah, I agree. And it's almost an element if you don't know what you don't know. So when you're learning, you don't know that you don't know a certain thing until someone mentions it and you learn it. So it's you're kind of missing out on opportunities just to pick little things up as you go. Do you think there might be an element as well as that new grads and early careers are coming into a really, really competitive market, and actually they might really need the remote working to be able to apply for jobs further afield? Do you think there's an element of that there's not enough jobs and they're trying their best to find one, so actually they might not be able to work in the office because they can't get there just because they're trying to find remote opportunities?
Of course, and some jobs do allow for that.
Yeah.
You know, from that point of view, some jobs do allow for it. So I completely agree. It's got its place, definitely. But for our industry and a lot of our clients, it doesn't, because obviously we are small. But yeah, I definitely think it's got its place. And you know, when you have got the big corporations, definitely, and it does work for a lot as well, doesn't it? But I think it takes out the personalised side of it and the teamwork, I got to be honest, I think.
Yeah.